If we are to accept the premise that Counter-Strike Global Offensive is a sport, except it's a sport that's played online instead of offline, then we can immediately go on to accepting a different premise. That as a sport or a game or a competition, it includes money. Organizations are starting to invest currency in it. And people are starting to take off and make this their full-time career. It's become an industry. There are documentaries about esports right now, and it's all a very exciting time. Hell, it's been an exciting time for a long fucking time. People have talked about esports like they're actual sports for a long time. People have made, documentaries about e-athletes for a long time. This has been a long time coming. People have been playing Counter-Strike longer than some people that are playing Counter-Strike right now have been alive. Okay? And really, it's long overdue for there to be a players association in Counter-Strike. It's long overdue for there to be a players association in any sport. If you look at, for instance, you look at global sports. Counter-Strike is a global sport. There are teams qualifying and playing against teams in Mongolia, playing against teams in Australia. There are teams all over the world playing against each other to try to go to majors and win buckets loads of cash. It's a fucking sport. It needs to be taken seriously. And why does it need to be taken seriously? Because shit happens. And you need to unionize in order to protect your rights as a player. Because now, as a player, you start to have a certain amount of value. Okay? And if you don't band together to protect what is your value, or because, okay, in the same way, if you look at visas or if you look at countries, they allow athletes to come into their countries based on the fact that they're skilled workers, based on the fact that, like, not everyone can kick a ball like Messi. You want to call soccer just a bunch of people kicking balls in different directions? Sure, you can reduce it to that. But at the end of the day, not everyone in the world can even come close to kicking a ball like Messi. There's only a handful amount of people who can. And guess what? They're all professional athletes who get paid buckets loads of money. Okay? So if you want to protect your investment as a player, and you want to protect what you are, which is like a specialized skilled worker, then you unionize and you band together, because there's all of these companies that form sponsors and sponsorships and organizations, and they have their interests, and they go after their interests. But players need to protect their own interests and their own agendas, and they need to unionize. This is done in every other sport. It's done in every other sport for a reason. Because if you don't, you can have organizations that can just make up rules, like FIFA could just make up rules, and they just be like, well, this is going to happen, like it or not. And, you could have, like Valve, for instance, could just be like, yep, we never made a rule about this thing, but guess what? You're banned because you broke a rule that didn't know existed. Yes, I'm talking about match fixing, by the way, in case you couldn't put one and one together. Match fixing is wrong. I'm not okay with it, but punishing people for something that you never told them was wrong in the first place, legally it has no fucking stand. Like, you can't stand on your own legal feet if you do that in a court of law. And things should always be argued like they're in a court of law. Because, that's where the fucking argumentation takes place. That's people who actually fucking study the goddamn thing. That's how that works. People actually understanding logic and logical fallacies and, relevance. Things like that. There's rules in place for good reason, for logical reasons. So, in terms of a players' union, the way it worked in FIFA, in like a global sport such as soccer, is that back in 1965, okay, there was basically representatives from players associations. There were already players associations in different countries, okay? So like soccer, there were countries back in the 60s that were really big on soccer, like France, like Italy, like the Netherlands, like England, even Scotland, okay? And these countries, they built players associations. They unionized. The players looked out for their own interests, the same way as organizations look out for their own interests. And then all of these different representatives from like the English Player Association. So there would be like a North American Player Association, and there would be like a CIS or whatever the fuck. I don't care if Ukraine wants one and Russia wants one. I really don't. And then there would be like a French Players Association, and the players who are in the professional league would basically just have a meeting, and they just vote on who they would think would be like the representative, the players' representative for the Players Association. Somebody who, you know, is competent and people trust, and he can handle, you know, talking to organizations, and he... Anyway, they decide whatever qualities they want for their representative to represent them, right? That's the whole point of fucking representative democracy in the first fucking place. Anyway, so you have these representatives, and these representatives then go on to make a sort of global... What happened with FIFA is they had a meeting in 1965 with FIFA Pro, and that's where they made FIFA Pro. So basically, they made a name, and they made resolutions, and they decided, you know, how it would work as a body, and they decided who would be the participants, and they basically then took different players who basically represented players from different countries, and they all came together, and they could basically start treating and deciding what things they would accept as players and what things they wouldn't. Just things that are generally in the interest of players. Like, you don't even necessarily need to start demanding things or making demands. You just need to have a players association just in case something does go wrong. You can then go on from there and kind of, you know, talk to whatever governing body you want and have a unified front. Okay? And honestly, when you're talking about people's livelihood now, which is what Counter-Strike has become, it's literally become some people's livelihood. It's the only way they're necessarily making money. Then that's where a real players association would come from. Is it going to happen overnight? No, I obviously not. It could, but just knowing the people involved, like, here's the thing, like, there are very respected people, good people, competent people within the realm of Counter-Strike. Even though there's a bunch of like idiots and man children who never grew up or went to school in the first place, there are also people, you know, like Get Right, and, you know, people like Shocks, people like Happy. There are some smart people who are competent and they understand other human beings and they socialize well, and you know, they're not just complete autists that can get together and sort of maybe take time out of their own day and have the foresight to understand why this would be beneficial for themselves as a union and for increasing the game and legitimizing the game and protecting their own interests as players. And I think a players association is the next step forward. Definitely needs to happen. You know, it could happen within the next year. It could take 5 years for it to happen, God forbid. But yeah, I mean, I've said all that needs to be said.